Remember that time that Texas lost a couple of high caliber interior defensive linemen to the NFL draft? I do. I was there for that. Full disclosure, I'm a Seahawks fan and I like the Byron Murphy pick. I like it a lot. Anyway, those two guys were unsung heroes to the wide audience of college football fans in the country that led to Texas's rise, getting back to a national championship level and playing in the Sugar Bowl last year, ultimately falling to Washington. So I look at that as being a legitimate whole. And I look again at what they have done, and I love it. And I love the Jermayne Lole edition even more. So this is not the only defensive lineman that Texas has brought over. They hired as a co-defensive coordinator Johnny Nansen. Johnny Nansen was the defensive coordinator this past year at Arizona. So of course he brings with him Bill Norton, who comes over. Guy was really, really good for Arizona last year on the interior. Also brings over, I'm going to do my best to get this right. Here we go. We're going to try. Tiaoali Savea. I think I got it right. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. Two transfers come over from Arizona, and then Lole comes into the picture. Does anyone know how to pronounce his name correctly? I don't know, but that's the pronunciation that I've heard from those who have covered him. But what you need to know about this guy, 7th year college football player. You heard me correctly. 7th year college football player. Now, has Texas reloaded their defensive line with Lole and Norton and these other guys? You know, they got the 5-star edge, Colin Simmons, coming in. Is this going to be the same caliber defensive line? No. But what they have done here is, I think, minimize the drop-off. Because anytime you lose a first and a second round defensive tackle at the same time, it is darn near impossible to get the same production from that group. It is really, really challenging. I don't care what school, what program, what coach you are looking at. When you lose players that are taken in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, you're going to have a drop-off here. But Texas is doing a fantastic job. So in Jermayne Lole, they're getting a guy who played at Louisville this past year and does not put up numbers that blow you away. But you get a guy who has played a lot of college football, whose body is in shape, who plays at the Power 4 level, who belongs at that level, and is looking to find an extra gear that he hasn't shown in the last couple of years. So he made 12 appearances this past season for Louisville. He had just 1.5 sacks. His best season came a couple of seasons ago, several years ago at this point, at Arizona State. He had 6.5 sacks in that year. And Arizona State was a pretty darn good team. And he was a pretty darn good player for the Sun Devils at that time. So if you get him back to that sort of form and you get Bill Norton to play the way that he's capable of, I look at this Texas defensive line and say, boom, done, solid, real good. Not high level, not carrying your defense, but not going to be a liability, not going to be a weakness, not going to be something that makes you go, oh man, I miss Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Well, you're going to miss those guys at some level, but I really, really like this move. I really, really like these couple of moves for Texas here to solidify the defensive line, and I like Texas a lot. Their first year going in the SEC, I like them more than Oklahoma. And by the way, that's the icing on top of the Jermayne Lole cake for Texas fans. He was an Oklahoma verbal commit, flipped him over to the Longhorns. Doesn't hurt. Does not hurt. Now, Oklahoma landed Dominic Williams, and that was someone who Texas was going after. But this is the sort of move that you got to be able to pull off in the modern world of college football, because if you're not getting a guy of this caliber, somebody else is. And Oklahoma wanted him for a reason. Texas goes out and they get him. Dominic Williams goes to Oklahoma. Both parties probably happy at some level. Couple other transfer names to keep your eye on as the portal days progress, because there's still a lot of players in the transfer portal who are going to exit and find a new home. Gavin Meyer is another defensive lineman. Have not heard that Texas is necessarily involved there. Don't know that they would need to be, but he has heard from, or at least had conversations with, been linked to Wisconsin, USC, Cal, and Illinois. He's a 4-year player from the University of Wyoming. Over the last couple of years, he's totaled 65 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. That's a pretty solid couple of seasons for an interior defensive lineman. I don't think you're getting a game wrecker here, but if you are lacking depth along the defensive line. I think Meyer can be that sort of player. And most interestingly, USC is involved. Now, Trojan fans, if you look on the correct message boards, are not thrilled with the way they have failed to recruit several defensive linemen to go play at USC. Cal is in the mix. Wisconsin's in the mix, which is where Meyer is from originally. Played at Wyoming for the last several years. Illinois in the mix. That's a very random assortment of Big Ten teams. Don't forget. Cal, of course, playing in the ACC. But I think that's a notable defensive line transfer name to watch right now. And defensive linemen have been really, really highly coveted. You saw Derek Harmon from Michigan State wind up at Oregon. His teammate, Simeon Barrow Jr., wound up at Miami. Miami had a former four-star edge, Jaden Wayne, go to Washington. These guys have been really, really highly sought after because the consensus, at least from what I've heard on a couple of different sites that cover recruiting in the transfer portal, is that defensive linemen at an elite level have been in kind of short supply. And so you're seeing these guys field a lot of offers, take their times. I don't know what the timeline is for Gavin Meyer to commit, but Wisconsin, USC, Cal, Illinois, all reportedly in the running there, and he's going to go and play. I don't know if he lines up and immediately becomes an all-conference caliber player in the Big Ten or the ACC. I know wherever he goes, he's going to have an opportunity to play because like Jermayne Lole, the guy is not lacking for years in a weight room or time spent getting his body into game shape. He's already there. Just needs a new opportunity. Curious to see where he ends up. On the other side of the ball, in the trenches, Sidney Fugar. Interesting name here. So, guy who began his career at Western Illinois, 6'5", 325 pounds. And yeah, he plays offensive tackle. I know that's a big surprise to everybody. He's a big kid. He's a really big kid. Spent this past year at South Carolina. Didn't really find a home. Didn't establish a consistent role. But was at South Carolina for a reason. Because after starting for 9 games the prior year at Western Illinois, he's a guy that was drawing a good amount of attention. Shane Beamer and company brought him in. Did not quite work out. Washington has reportedly been involved here. He's already taken visits or had conversations with Colorado, of course, and UCLA. Both schools in the mix. Washington could use an offensive lineman. Had Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies on the show last week. Offensive line is still a question mark, and they are looking to add names in the transfer portal, and Fugar feels like someone who's a little bit of a flyer in that you haven't seen him prove it consistently for a long period of time at the power level, but if you're able to kind of mold him with those physical traits, you could have something. Did not grade well on Pro Football Focus last year, did not have the season he was hoping for, but a fresh start, you never know what that can do for a guy. So, Gavin Meyer, the Wyoming defensive line transfer, Sidney Fugar, the South Carolina offensive line transfer, names to watch for in the portal. And as I mentioned, I really like what Texas did, adding Jermayne Lole, flipping him from Oklahoma. The Sooners get Dominic Williams. Guys are on the move. The portal, be portaling. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.